Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
So I hope that over the 2.5 days, or 1.5, 2 days total, I guess you guys have really brought a whole new understanding of things that are happening in your space with your peers, and the thought leadership has been really enlightening for you, and you can bring that back to the team. At the lunch, I'll go over some of the kind of follow-up activities that'll be taking place, post-event, and share a little bit more details about what we're going to be doing after the event to kind of share additional details. So we want you guys to bring something back to your teams and to have something material that you can also share as well. So as we wrap up the final day, this fireside chat, I know we've had a couple of days of talking about the importance of big data and how data is so important to the enterprise, how data is so important to even governments and universities as we think about all the things that we're connecting and automating, and data plays such an important role. So today I bring on stage Naidu Gandham, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. And before we get started, I'd like for him to introduce himself and his role at Pacific Life and a little bit of background around his previous roles so we can kind of learn a little bit more about him before we jump into the topics.
All right. Good morning, folks. It's very interesting the way I entered into data arena. For better or worse, the very first job that I ever took in anything remotely related to technology was back in India before I even came to the United States. That time, it was in 1990, I was working with at federal level, National Levels Planning Commission. So I was just compiling tons and tons of data for central planning needs. That was for entire transportation sector for the entire country. So the metadata that I ended up collecting, it's 250 megabytes. And fast forward, more or less it is corresponding to that 15 years. In 2014, I checked, it's 250 gigabytes. It's 1,000 times. So that goes, the reason I'm highlighting that is, it is that 1,000 times increment every 15 years is generally the standard. Perhaps it can accelerate further as we move forward, and that further cements that Moore's law applies to even data. So right now I am in Pacific Life. I'm looking after the entire data footprint, both structured and unstructured. So increasingly, we are realizing that data governance is going to be the key. We have to organize our data, and then we have to define it crisply so that it won't be a runaway train. So in the past assignments, I handle data in various roles, architect to administration side. But right now, I'm in a position to oversee all aspects of data. That goes to say governance, analytics, and the rest of the other aspects of data. So that's where I am right now.
Well, I think for all of us in the audience, especially for those that maybe are a little further in the game or those that are getting started, what are some of the ways that, let's just think about a startup or a medium-sized company that's really looking to do more with their data, right, as opposed to just collecting it and setting aside or pushing things out to the cloud, or what are some ways or recommendations that you have to help folks here, especially our attendees, get started or to do better with data governance, data policy, data management?
Right. So first thing I would say is, from my experience, you want to look at data from your context, what it means to you. You have to define its meaning to you. So more or less, you have to understand what comprises all aspects of data for you, all functionality aspects. So whether it could be HR, whether it could be customer service, or it could be the nuts and bolts of your actual data, depending on the industry and the sector you are in. So once you have fairly a good understanding of overall at a top level what your data comprises of, then you have to strive to achieve some sort of a definition to it, without which everything would be haphazard, like everything would be piecemeal, which you don't want to do. That is typically the shortcoming majority of us face.
So data definition, what do you mean by that? Like, can you go into that a little bit further? I mean, do you,
Sure.
do you have to define the data based on the business outcomes or things that are related to your goals?
Right.
Or do you have to define the data in terms of what kind of data it is? You know, you talked about metadata. So
Right.
maybe go into that a little.
Right. So when I talk about the data definition, first of all, you have to understand what, if given the business you are in, by and large, what basically is comprising of your data, meaning your business may be like a manufacturing of widgets, some nuts and bolts, but you have to not just consisting of only that particular piece of information, but you also have to say you are going to sell that one, sales, marketing, then you have to say that you have to making sure that you have accounts payables, receivables, you have ledgers, financial data, then you have to say you need some workforce to work with you and then make sure this is happening. Then you have HR. So you have to understand all facets of your data and then have a boundaries around it. So your definition would be crisply understand what is the reference data, what is the seed data. So once you have that, then your metadata is going to form around it. So any silos or any things organically that has grown over the years, you're going to say that, hey, I can begin to see, even though these are individual silos and haphazardly grown over years, you can still form it and grow it around the definition of metadata. So.
No, I mean, I think that as we think about your industry, insurance, the insurance market or the insurance industry. What are some of the data that you're collecting? Is this more around your customers' data? Is it also internal operational data? Is it all of the above? And then I'll ask a little bit more about standardization.
Sure. I would say it's all of the above. And then we have been in this business for past 150 years. So the data has grown by leaps and bounds, no doubt about it. But not all data is equal, right? I mean, you have to decipher the fact that there is extraneous, non-essential data that has grown over time. And some of that data is also not so relevant, perhaps from even statute of limitation standpoint. Each industry has, obviously, you all know, have its own statute of limitations. For insurance and being in financial services with higher level of fiduciary responsibilities, we have 12 to 15-year horizon. And anything beyond that is not so critical. And then also the demographics is changing. So data can even get stale even for a company of that longevity. So we compile, we store all kinds of data. So right now we have grown the structured data as we see operationally what we handle is amounts to something around the 40 terabytes. But if you take all other aspects, archival for legality reasons, compliance reasons, statute of limitations reasons, we are approaching not too far away from being a petabyte. So including the archived backups, and then any moment we need to be able to get to it, and whether or not we tiered the data over time, and then we set aside all of that. So that's in a nutshell what we do. I mean, our data is about policies, life insurance policies, and about the policy holders, producers on the other hand who sell the policies and make that entire equation work, and about the product. And we have a wide range of products within whole life insurance, and then product related data, and then how we structure each of this product, various scenarios under which these work, a whole range of data just about the core data that we call products, policy holder information, and producer information. And rest aside, you have all other aspects, HR, sales, marketing, etc. So it adds up.
Well, I mentioned standardization. Do you believe data should be standardized first and foremost? And what tools are you using? And are there requirements for the insurance industry that kind of pull in that standardization requirement?
So standardization helps. I mean, standardization is an essential reality everybody faces in every industry. I mean, in order to thrive in your industry, and then being able to interoperate, and then in an environment that is understandable, basically dealable with one another, standardization is key. So to that extent, standards are a blessing and a reality which we always strive for. And the one we strive for is by using metadata management, master data management. And that tool, we embraced it almost for past 6-7 years. It has been a key to us. And fortunately, that's going to pave the way for us to have a healthy data governance. Because data governance without having a master data management, like really defining your reference data, is not going to be successful.
So I think we've all talked about, kind of bringing data to a more intelligent level.
Right.
We talked about tools like AI and other emerging technologies. Mm-hmm. What are some of the core areas of your business where you're dependent on data analytics and smart data, mm-hmm. where we're taking the data and we're also doing other things with the data to alert, notify, to maybe look for anomalies, to look for patterns, right. especially as you think about patterns and risk, right. and insurance and things like that. What are some of the requests that you're getting and how you're dealing with that for right. your role?
So, I came from transportation background. We say transportation is a derived demand. So just as using that as an analogy, I say even data is derived from data itself. So data breeds data. So when you are deriving data from data, you're being increasingly cognizant about where the data is emanating from, what its significance over its life cycle. So, for example, in the agile business world, everybody is embracing agile model, working model. With that one, automation, you have to basically harvest all these tools. The way you really make any value out of these tools is to successfully collect the data and use the data to further refine your data cohorts. So to that extent, data is increasingly important, and then we have to really make sense out of the data more increasingly so now than ever in the past.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about the application. So of all the core application or benefits based on your experience, what are some of the areas where you feel this is impactful, or are there specific areas in your organization where there are an increased need or an application to make that data more intelligent? Are there any particular trends that are happening in your space?
Yes. Take, for example, we have customer relationship management. Many companies, across many industries are using that application. So do we in our own way. So that is two sides of it, both policyholders, that's one of our customers, but also we treat producers who sell our life insurance policies also as a form of a customer. So when we collect that information about the customer, and earlier cycles, maybe perhaps before this sort of an awareness set in, that data used to exist in a silo of its own. But then we realized over time that data is increasingly going to be relevant and very instrumental in when we sit down, a producer sits down in the field with a prospective policyholder to sell a life insurance policy, how that's going to be useful. So we know the trends with the customer and information, and what they purchased in the past, what they have not, what the demographics they come from, and their risk profiles. And that's all harvested, that's all made sense of, and we use the analytics from it and then feed it to the other applications, both in sales, marketing, as also in the product illustration. So that way these are all integrated. So the one set of information, that's used to sit in one silo, that's a gone era, so to speak. So everybody has to know that data, proactively look at it. It has a life cycle, it has its tentacles, it has its dependencies. So you have to look at data in a more comprehensive way.
So, based on your experience in the transportation industry and the insurance industry, what are some of the challenges? You think about, we've talked about team culture and, the folks that you're working with. What are some of the challenges that you've come across, and how did you deal with them personally? And are they more cultural or requests that maybe you weren't able to meet, internal requests, or what are some of the challenges that you're facing?
Right. So typically, when you wear the hat of data, inevitably you end up being seen as somewhat of a hardliner, conservative, and then like custodian who has a lot of stake, who has his arms around the data. But along with that, that's a perception. But when you work with it, look, it's not my data, it's everybody's data. We're all in it together. So as long as you see that everybody has fiduciary responsibilities at every level. For example, somebody walks in and says, a new employee came into the Pacific Life and they want a request to the database. And somebody says, is that okay? We can give the database because it's operational data, and then the moment you give the access to the data, now he's across multiple databases. So we have to see how far this goes. So we follow the typical model of, hey, give what is absolutely essential. And also we are typically, the way we overcome some of the challenges, like other companies or in the past, other companies that I used to work with, operational OLTP, regular bread and butter data is what people also want to make sense out of by ad hoc reporting, running queries against it, which really hampers the performance. Every one of us know. So we started shadowing those operational data. So that became a huge success for us. So that that shadowing, basically, we typically refresh every 4 to 6 hours, if it is really necessary, or at least daily ones. People they don't want the queries to be reporting needs that real time. So we're okay with that. So one of the challenges I say is, look data more comprehensively. Everybody has a stake, and look at it with a more holistic approach. That's what I advocate. That's what I evangelize, and then so everybody is hooked in with that.
So you mentioned data queries and ad hoc reporting and whatnot. What are some of the, I want to go a little off. Sure. What are some of the software tools or vendors that you work with that have been really vital to kind of help facilitate some of the requests and the needs that you've been working on?
Right. So anytime when you say to anyone outside, and especially to any vendors that I have this challenges, whether it is reporting or ad hoc reporting, I want to run the reports, analytics out of it. Everybody jumps on board, obviously, to tell their tools of whether it is analytics tool or data warehouse tools. So one thing I say is, look, data analytics, data warehousing, data marts, that's all well and good, but ultimately everybody cannot lose, what they cannot lose sight of is curate the data, how well you curate the data. So at the back of their mind, when somebody says curation, somebody says, okay, we're not talking about bits and bytes just for the sake of bits and bytes. Don't get carried away with the fact that scalability, massive growths, volumes. No, I mean, it has to make sense. That data needs to tell a narrative, a story that is meaningful to the business and its growth and its sustainability. So that's how we use it.
But some of the vendors, I mean, what are some of those?
The vendors that we have been working with, especially when we have to take this data and extract it and ingest into our other major applications and databases, are primarily in the ETL space, extraction, transformation, and loading. We use Informatica to an extent. There are other competitors who are coming into that space and making it more. And likewise, in data warehousing side, also other data warehousing vendors out there. But from the reporting standpoint, we use a variety of them. We used to use in the past business objects based, but then we standardize. This is a learning. In iterations, you go through different cycles, and you see some vendors who is more sustainable, more runway ahead of them. They have figured a long duration with which their solution is sustainable. To that degree, they are more adaptable. For example, ClickView is one of the reporting software, and that's the vendor we work with. So it has been quite helpful.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the trends. I think for all of us, as we think about IoT and artificial intelligence, really a lot of that's driven around machine learning. What are some of the emerging technologies or trends that you think are coming that are important for you in your industry that you think they're going to be maybe supportive or change or maybe be disruptive to some of the things that you're doing in the insurance space?
Right. I wouldn't pretend that we are in any way the cutting edge, bleeding edge when it comes to ML or AI, but we will definitely go in that direction, because analytics without the aid of these ML and AI is not going to be all that meaningful. So one of the areas where we are seeing this ML and artificial intelligence is to really figure out which data cohort and which where we can really make sense out of, and then say what demographics to which we can really custom tailor our products and supply that information to the sales and marketing. Say, hey, this is the cohort, this is the demographics group where if you approach and sell, you are more than likely successful. So you're increasing their odds of being in success in the field.
So I want to talk a little bit about data scientists and data engineers. I think a lot of organizations are starting to put a little bit more emphasis on the need to have these data experts, as we really think, okay, now that we've been collecting this data, we've probably figured out a cloud strategy or a way to really compute and figure out what we need. But now we're really starting to need the minds of the data scientists and data engineers to come in. And there's also a gap in the industry in terms of those folks that are available and readily available that come in and also have somewhat of an understanding of your business. Maybe give us some thoughts around where, is that something that you guys are looking at as you really start to do more with data?
Yes, we do have data scientists within our organization. But before I go there, I would say there is no consensus and meaningful, totally a well agreed upon definition to data science. Oftentimes we think that typically discussed as such as it's an amalgamation, or it comes at the juncture of mathematical computing, algorithmic computing, subject domain level expertise, and then your statistics. And somewhere in between, in the confluence of all of it, in the junction, whoever thrives in that space are the ideal candidates to be the data scientists, right? That's generally the perception right now. I mean, even though there is no real fundamental truth and then the real footing to it, solid footing to it, we are approaching in a very commonsensical way. So the data scientists which we have are sitting with business end of it. They understand the data, where it originates from, why is it meaningful to us, what we need to curate, what we need to extract, and then tell us within information. I sit in information technology, so I come to IT saying that we have this data, what we think this is more meaningful, and it defines our business. How do we model this data? How do we put that into a structure? And that's where we step in and help them. So data science is increasingly gaining significance even in companies like us to that extent.
So, this has been a really great background. So I want to talk a little bit about what the future holds for Pacific Life. What's on your radar now, and what are some of the key priorities for the rest of this year for you?
Sure. What we are, as we speak, in the midst of reorg. Periodically, it just revitalizes. It's an age to do that, because we look at it and we look at the business cycles, where we are and what are the upcoming economic challenges down the horizon. We prepare proactively for it, which is all well and good. So one thing we are head on confronting before we're getting ahead to the train and facing that is, we know that millennials, the new generation of people who do not see life insurance with the same level of priority and importance as the prior generations have been seeing. So to really educate them, bring to the table, and tell them the importance of it, we are trying to make it as accessible, as amenable as possible. So to that degree, we're using technologies. We're using automated provisioning, and then basically saying, hey, and even the self-interactive, like in a devices-based interaction with all the technologies, fairly rapidly, they pick and choose, because we have competitors knocking on our doors where they're rapidly selling life insurance without necessarily having them to making them wait for several days. It's a matter of minutes, just like your auto insurance policy. They are able to sell that. Of course, there is a back end. They do all the screening asynchronously later on, but we are seeing that is an emerging trend, so we are trying to cater to that. So all our products, and then we are increasingly going in the direction. So automation is key. Automated underwriting is key. And we went and then rolled out first iteration of products that cater to this automated underwriting, but we're going to refine that further and further as we go along. That's the most challenging thing right now.
So I want to leave, before we get into some Q&A, I want to leave the audience with kind of some recommendations. Your background in data governance, data management, data policies, maybe give some final thoughts on recommendations to our audience.
So one thing, the key takeaway, if you will, is I say data is not an afterthought. Data doesn't just happens. Data, and you need to foresee how would it, what it's meaning to you down the road and through all aspects of it, through the entire life cycle of it. Once you have a healthy perception of and an understanding of how data should be viewed, and you will be that much proactive rather than trying to always being at the receiving end, trying to have to cope up with it. Secondly, when it comes to governance, I told that it's the key to that, because you have to define, and then the definition is through master data management or some sort of a reference data, and you put structures around it, and your data cohorts, data sets have to be that much more meaningful, tied into that MDM model. Once you do that, then I think the good side, it should be the good side, the implication of it is you should be unwittingly being satisfying all your compliance frameworks. From my prior assignments, one of my bosses basically said something when at some point we were all concerned as an organization about merely trying to meet the compliance requirements of, in that case, it's a PCI / SOX compliance. He said something important. He said, Naidu, compliance, don't fight it. Don't fight it. It is inevitable. You just meet it, right? But while trying to meet it, if your posture, if you position yourself in such a way that, compliance, I'm going to meet it automatically, almost, without having any problem, by striving much more higher. You want to do the business right way. You have fiduciary responsibilities, so you want to have visibility to data, you want to have proper controls around it, and then you are not seeing, this is the compliance, merely I have to somehow struggle to meet that requirement. Then in that case, you're always in a reactive mode, trying only to that much, to meet that specific bar somebody artificially held on top of you. Strive higher. So then by doing that, automatically you will meet all these compliance frameworks, that is HIPAA, SOX, etc. Of course, it doesn't necessarily mean or trivialize the individual specificities and then constraints of each of these compliance frameworks. You will meet them, but your posture has to be much more healthier, long-term thinking, proactive.
No, that's been very helpful. I think that you've provided us with a lot of insight around, your experience. I think, as I think about data, I think about the interface, with users and the dashboards and being able to have live data and information at our fingertips, and especially during our workday, information that's relevant to us, information that might be relevant to the customer, in your case, the insurance policy holder, right? Being able to, it also sounds like real time has become even more important to capture that market share, right, from your competitors. So leveraging and using data in a way to provide real time closing of that customer, so that deal is done and you have that policy holder. And your competitors are really pushing quickly on that, so you also have to stay ahead of the game. So I appreciate that insight, and I want to open it up to questions from our audience, especially those that are maybe thinking a little bit more about data and data analytics, and maybe have some questions around the thought leadership that we have in front of us. Questions? Now remember, we can't really see you, so may say your name and the company you're with.
My name is Satya. So it was a very interesting conversation, and I think in my own organization, data didn't have much of a place, but the last 3-4 years, I've seen data becoming its own entity. And I'm starting to realize data is the new oil, because everybody wants it. And I think, how do you see the evolution of data from a people perspective? I mean, how does this organization evolve? Because we're starting to see data architects. We now have a data leader.
Right.
But something tells me that this could be bigger than that, as big as security is today.
Right.
So how do you see this evolving?
So for that reason, I think it's a good question, but for that reason, I say data, handling the data, architecting it, or even like for scalability reasons, day to day, or even short to medium run, how you value scale, how you provision it, how well you meet the compliance requirements is one aspect of it, important aspect of it. But I think people who will have to come into this field of data science, they have to see it in a much more holistic way. That's how I personally feel like. So these folks, the next generation of people who come and then look at data is not just basically, for the volume, for the sake of volume. They have to really, because once you start seeing the bits and bytes out of it, and then look at the operational aspects of it, the constraints with which you have to handle and then cope up and to cater to the automation demands, etc., you really are looking at just trees. And for that reason, I say people who step into this data science field will have to have much more larger role. They have to wear on the hat of data curators. That's how ultimately they have to see themselves. Otherwise, it's going to be, it's always uphill battle. You always see, voluminous amount of data, and then it doesn't matter. Data is bound to grow, even to larger and larger amounts. But that's immaterial. When you have to make sense out of it, when you have to curate it, it's not a big deal. So that's why you have to have a better handle of what it means to you at every level, the data.
I think that it brings itself to the fact that the data scientists and data engineers, even data curators, whatever title they have, that data architects, that they have to have. We want them to come into the workforce, especially the newer ones coming in that have business understanding. And if they're in a particular industry, they understand the operational requirements, the compliance requirements. Those are just table stakes. You have to have that background, that knowledge base. And those coming into the workforce or those that we're hiring and bringing onto our teams, whether they get the training there or, through immersion, right? Sometimes you just got to jump right in. That's an important piece, I think, to it. Other question?
Hi, my name is Anwar from WSSC, Water Utility. The way you describe data scientists, you have them embedded in the business unit.
Yes.
Are they under the IT organization, or are they business employees? Who do they report to? One of the challenges that we face is that the business implements, they want new applications, they have new streams of data, but we don't have the expertise that really knows where that, what that data means and how to interpret it, and they ask for reports, and then we get into this back and forth of who's responsible. So I'm just interested in your take on that.
Sure. So I think it was not my decision how they positioned these data scientists within Pacific Life, but it was the right decision. It turned out to be. They are embedded in individual business units. They're not in IT. I think because they know data much better, being close to the individual business units, they live and breathe, and that's what they make sense out of the data. I think sensing the data where it originates, it has more meaningful value over longer horizon than the tail end of looking at the data definitions, etc. So by the time the data comes to IT and into our data teams, and say now put a structure around it, architect it in a way that is very efficient, and then it gives you the good performance, low latencies. Those are all, by the time it comes, it's already well defined. So of course, we still make questions and ask why it is the data set is defined in such a fashion, and what its interdependence. Because one of the dangers is when you take their word and knowledge, intimate knowledge of that units they belong to, and then think that, okay, they defined it already well, so I'll take that as, holy grail. Instead of that, basically say, hey, okay, you defined it sufficiently well enough, but this data has other dependencies with other units. So to that extent, when we do have to do due diligence before we model it, we architect it.
One more question. Any other question?
Yes. So you mentioned the role of the curator, and I'm just wondering if there's also a concept where they're somewhat of like a marketer or an evangelist for the importance of data, because as someone that has to make decisions in the organization based upon the data set,
Right.
You struggle with inaccuracy, right, or not always perfect data.
Right.
And so I'm wondering if you could comment about the role of the curator, right, in terms of trying to educate the business on the importance of the data, because I don't know if those ropes kind of go all the way to the ground, right, where they understand why it's critical.
Right. So the data curator's role, in the units, these are embedded units within which the data scientists and the way they curate the data, it's at their level. But ultimately, when you have to bring all the data together and account for all the inaccuracies, and then you have to cleanse that data and put some hygiene around it, and then make sure that there is an integrity to it, and all the dependencies are taken into account, then you do a different level of curation. You look at things for its broader implications. Yes, at some level, at an individual embedded business unit level, they did some level of curing, but it's an iterative process. You have to do it other levels as well. So to that extent, I think every level, this curation is very important.
I would add to that. I think that every business unit or every department, HR, corporate strategy, marketing, we all are relying on the data that's important for our role in our business. And like you said, there's some interdependencies. Working with government customers or speaking with them, that's always the big topic of discussion is, maybe the first responders are collecting this data, but it's very important for traffic management over here, but we're not sharing data across departments. I think the same thing happens in organizations. So, if you have someone that could take a step back and look across the organization, I think that could be pretty powerful. Does that exist today? I don't know if that exists in a lot of organizations, but data has become so important to each and every one of our roles. If you're in marketing, you want to know trend lines and see patterns and demographics and see segmentation analysis for your customers or for your partners. And, every department is going to have a different breakout or need to see that type of data. But these guys that sit in the back, they can't do all of this all on their own. So if you do have folks in your organization that can champion some of the causes that you have and why it's important, I think it could be pretty powerful for the organization. It might be some new ways of thinking. Maybe the business units think about having a little bit more of a role in looking at data and the importance of that.
People who are in the data governance end of it, they also have to take on this role of evangelizing the larger implications of data. Handling data is not glamorous by any means, but it has to be done. It's a very critical artifact, which is forms your substrata of your business.
No, I appreciate that, and I want to give a round of welcome of applause to Naidu. This is not always the most exciting and sexy topic when it comes to IT, but it's such an important foundational piece for everything that we're doing. So I thank you for joining us this morning. And I think now Phil's going to have a few words around our next one.
Before I say, I just want to really thank Philip and then Spencer, Tom, Lisa, and you, all of you, for inviting. I learned quite a bit. So great presentations, great setting, intimate setting with which I was able to interact with many people.
Thank you.